Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Yeah.
Today we're getting into something really quite specific, Opus Reticulatum.
That's right, a very distinctive Roman building technique.
Yeah, distinctive is the word. Imagine walls, but they look like they're covered in this perfect diagonal net of little stones. That's what we're unpacking. So our mission really is to figure out what this net-like work actually is, what went into it, how they built it, and I guess why it even matters in Roman architecture.
Exactly. We're digging into the architectural history here, focusing on how the Romans actually built stuff.
So Opus Reticulatum, the name itself, net-like work, is pretty descriptive.
It really is. It's essentially a facing, a kind of veneer that they put over a core of Roman concrete, Opus Caementicium.
Okay, and the key thing is those little stones.
Yeah, the cubilia. They're small, usually pyramid-shaped, sometimes like a truncated cone, but always with a square base.
Right.
Typically made from volcanic tuff, especially around Rome. And they set these diagonally at a 45-degree angle.
Which gives you that net pattern.
Yeah.
Like an oblique checkerboard.
Precisely. And when it was done really well, the mortar joints were super fine, really emphasizing that geometric precision. It wasn't just decorative, though.
Oh.
It actually served as a kind of lost formwork, too, holding the fresh concrete core in place while it set.
Ah, okay. Double duty. So let's talk about that core. Opus Caementicium. Roman concrete. That's legendary, isn't it?
It really is. It was revolutionary. Basically, a mortar, lime, water, sand, often with pozzolana.
That volcanic ash.
Exactly. That was the secret ingredient, you could say. Gave it incredible strength, durability. It even hardened underwater.
Wow.
And then mixed with commenta, just rubble, stone fragments, bits of gravel, broken pottery sometimes.
Super strong. Allowed them to build big, complex stuff.
Yeah.
But maybe not the best looking.
Not on its own, no. It was pretty rough visually. So Opus Reticulatum really developed as an aesthetic solution, a way to make these massive concrete structures look, well, more refined.
Makes sense. Strong inside, stylish outside. So tell me more about those cubilia stones and how they put it all together.
Okay, so the cubilia bases were usually around 10 centimeters square. Tuff was common, like I said, because it was easy to cut, and they had tons of it in central and southern Italy.
Right.
Sometimes limestone or basalt, too. You could even get different colored tuff for, polychrome effects.
Oh, interesting.
The core is the concrete, and then a simple mortar, lime, fine sand, water was used to actually set the cubilia and fill the joints.
And the process, layer by layer.
Yeah, pretty much. They'd pour or lay down a course of the concrete mixture, and while it was still wet, workers would press the cubilia into it, point first, in those diagonal rows.
Seems efficient.
It was relatively efficient, yeah. And importantly, placing the cubilia didn't necessarily require highly skilled masons. Less skilled labor could manage that part.
But what about corners? That diagonal pattern seems like it would be a nightmare at a 90-degree angle.
Ah, yes. Good point. That was definitely a weakness. The diagonal lines don't meet neatly or strongly at a corner.
So what did they do?
They developed what we call Opus Mixtum, mixed work. They'd combine the reticulatum facing with stronger vertical elements right at the corners or around openings like doors and windows.
New kind of elements. Stone blocks.
Sometimes cut stone, Opus quadratum, but much more commonly they used fired brick Opus latericium or testaceum. Just vertical bands of brick reinforcing those weak points.
Pragmatic. Solve the problem. And the final look. Did they always leave the net pattern showing?
Often, yes. It was decorative in its own right, but sometimes it was just a base layer. They might cover it with plaster, maybe paint frescoes on it, or even apply expensive marble veneers, so its role could vary quite a bit.
Okay. Now, this wasn't the first technique they used for facing concrete, right?
Yeah.
How did it evolve?
Correct. It grew out of an earlier, less regular style called Opus Incertum.
Uncertain work.
Yeah, using more irregularly shaped stones fitted together. There was even a transitional phase, sometimes called Opus Quasi-Reticulatum, where you can see them starting to arrange the stones more regularly, but not quite perfectly diagonal yet. Reticulatum itself really took off in the late Republic, say, late 2nd, early 1st century BCE. Its peak popularity was probably the 1st century BCE through the 1st century CE. Think Augustus, the Julio-Claudians, the Flavians.
Right in the heart of the empire's growth. Vitruvius wrote about it then.
Yes, Vitruvius describes it around 30 BCE, but then moving into the High Empire, the 2nd century CE onwards, it started to decline.
Why was that?
Mostly because Opus Lateritium, brick-faced concrete, became dominant. Brick could be mass-produced more easily, transported more readily, and it was just more structurally versatile, especially for corners, arches, vaults.
So brick just won out eventually.
Largely, yes. Though reticulatum didn't vanish overnight. You still find examples later on, but brick became the go-to standard.
Geographically, you said it was big in central and southern Italy because of the tuff.
Exactly. Rome, Ostia, Pompeii, Herculaneum, those are hot spots. It's much rarer outside Italy.
Any notable exceptions?
Well, Herod the Great's Winter Palace complex down in Jericho in Judea has some significant Opus Reticulatum. That's a key example showing Roman influence spreading.
Interesting.
You might find occasional bits in North Africa, or the aqueduct of the Gir in France has some sections, but generally not as common in places like Spain compared to other Roman methods.
Can you point to a few really classic examples? Places people might know?
Sure. Hadrian's villa, Villa Adriana at Tivoli, has quite a bit, though often in that Opus Mixtum style combined with brick. That's relatively late use.
Okay.
For an early grand example, look at the Mausoleum of Augustus in Rome. Ostia Antica, the port of Rome, is fantastic because you see the whole evolution of wall types.
Right.
And Pompeii and Herculaneum, obviously, because they're so well preserved, you see reticulatum used in all sorts of buildings there. And Herod's Palace, as mentioned, is really important for its location outside Italy.
So comparing it again, Opus Incertum was earlier, more irregular. How did they stack up?
Well, reticulatum gave you that regularity, that neat finish, and probably faster construction because the pieces were standardized. Vitruvius actually thought Incertum was stronger because the irregular stones interlocked better. But modern analysis suggests that well-made reticulatum could be perfectly durable too. It really depended on the quality of the mortar and the workmanship.
And then Lateritium, the brick.
That became the champion later on. Industrial production, easier transport, better for complex structures like arches. It just had more advantages as the empire scaled up its building project.
And Opus Mixtum was the hybrid solution.
Right, combining reticulatum's look with brick strength. And then much later you get things like Opus Vitatum with horizontal bands of small rectangular stone.
Okay, let's boil it down. Advantages of Opus Reticulatum.
Main things are the attractive, regular look, standardization, which meant, efficient construction, potentially using less skilled labor for parts of it, and it adapted well to curves.
On the downsides,
potential structural weaknesses, especially if the mortar wasn't great. It could have issues with delamination, the facing pulling away from the core over time. Tricky at corners, as we discussed, maybe limitations on really tall structures, and perhaps overall maybe not quite as robust long-term as really well-built Incertum or definitely Lateritium.
So it represents this really interesting moment in Roman building trying to balance the look, the aesthetics, with practical efficiency.
Absolutely. And its rise and fall kind of mirror bigger shifts in Roman technology, economy, maybe even labor organization.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's more than just a wall pattern.
Definitely. And, thinking about that precision, that very ordered visual impact, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does the popularity of Opus Reticulatum tell us about Roman values? Maybe that deep-seated Roman desire for order and regularity extended right down to the texture of their buildings. Something to think about.